What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another highly combustible reaction. But jumping into some learning. Time to learn something. We're going and learning today. Everybody join me for the adventure. If you enjoy it, get over show history with Hilbert, all the love in the world. Kneppelfreed, what was the Frisian civil rights movement? 1951. Let's learn something today. Let's go.
Today, the West
Take notes because there will be a quiz at the end.
Frisian language is the second language of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. It's taught in schools, and it's every Frisian's right to speak Frisian before the judge and with the forces of the law. However, that has not always been the case. Indeed, these advances were only made possible because of a civil rights movement and a host of legal and public protests in the 1950s.
Welkom naar een video. Welcome everyone. Where am I today? I am in Ljouwert, known to the Dutch as Leeuwarden, and where I am is in front of the Palace of Justice in the city. It's a fairly quiet day now, it's the heart of the city, so there's people walking around, but in 1951 this place was the scene of what might be termed a riot, a battle, and it's an incredibly important day for the Frisian language and for Frisian people, as we will find out in today's video.
As I've mentioned before on the channel, the Frisian language has a very old and prestigious history. It was and remains closely related to the language of the Anglo-Saxons and its descendants, English and Scots. In the form of Old English, it was written down mostly for legal texts from around the 12th century onwards. As the language of the Free Frisians, Old Frisian continued to flourish even as they were threatened by more centralized states from without. By the dawn of the 16th century, however, Frisia was divided up by neighbouring powers, and Frisian lost its status as a language of authority. In what would become the province of Friesland in the Netherlands, it was supplanted in all religious and official capacities, as well as in the cities, by the Dutch language. This led to Frisian being looked down on as simply bad Dutch and a dialect of farmers, despite its complex independent grammatical, morphological and lexical differences to the Dutch language. Despite this downturn in fortunes, Frisian remained the language of the countryside, and with the upswing in romantic nationalism in the second half of the 19th century, a Frisian movement sprang up to promote the language as one worthy of speaking and studying. These movements intensified their efforts in the first half of the 20th century, and began to challenge the discriminatory attitude of the central Dutch state towards the language and those who spoke it. These attitudes were reinforced by the law, which gave the Dutch language a strict monopoly in Friesland at the disadvantage of Frisian.
You can't just divide a place up and say, congratulations, now you're a part of us, now you need to learn our language. That seems like a dick move, but that's a weird expectation to say, all right, now everything's going to be Dutch. Well, we speak this other language completely. Why don't you, it's like a back and forth of why don't you learn our language? No, why don't you learn ours? I don't know. I can't see it in my mind. Nowadays, you just get a damn translator. How hard is it? Even any kind of government agency down here that has translators for all kinds of different things. Because why? Because you run into people from all walks of life. From all different places, from all around the world. A translator seems like the easiest bet. Let everyone speak whatever they want to speak.
Following the end of the Second World War and the German occupation, the Frisians had had enough. And in true Frisian fashion, it all began with milk. Molke and soepe, two rather innocuous Frisian words meaning milk and buttermilk, do not appear to be particularly criminal. However, when in 1948 two Frisian dairy workers, Wiebe van der Hoek and Jane de Leeuw, wrote this on their cans of milk and buttermilk instead of the Dutch melk and karnemelk, they were called before the judge. This would in all likelihood have gone down simply as a legal footnote in obscurity, were it not for the reaction of this said judge. Enter S.R. Wolters. Instead of simply fining the two for having the gall to write in their own mother tongue, he decided to humiliate them in front of the jury. He demanded to know of the pair, "U bent toch op school geweest? U spreekt toch Nederlands? You have been to school, you do speak Dutch. He then declared them guilty and charged them, all for writing the words milk and buttermilk. But this did not go unnoticed. Meet HxCReact, a Frisian poet and director of the newspaper Het Jernveenster Courier. He was outraged and took to his paper to defend the two and condemn the judge. With several open letters to the papers, Wolters fired back. While it did not change the legal outcome, the resentment and the tension continued to grow. 3 years later, it would boil over. A case was brought before Judge Wolters of a Frisian vet from the Lemmer. Sjerk Francis van der Burg had been stopped by police when crossing a road that had been blocked off by the provincial water board, and despite the fact that it had been an emergency, he was sent before the judge. Unlike the two milkmen who had been powerless to counteract Wolters' bullying, Van der Burg had been a leading member of the Federatie van Friese Studentenverenigings, the Federation of Frisian Student Societies, and was proud of his language and his heritage. In the courtroom, Van der Burg refused to speak Dutch and spoke Frisian instead, which was illegal. The judge in turn refused to understand. The crazy thing about this situation is that Judge Wolters could understand Frisian, and we know this because he had lived there for several years. He was of the opinion that learned, civilized people spoke Dutch, something that Van der Burg would have none of.
That's the craziest mentality of all time. You actually understood, it shouldn't be an issue. Nowadays, you could speak in any court in the world, and they're just going to be like, hey, grab a translator. We're going to need a translator. We're going to need someone that can decipher this. But if you already speak the language and you just want to be a pompous ass and be like, no, here I'm not going to speak this language that's lower than me. I don't know.
An impasse was thus reached, the court session being adjourned so that a translator might be found.
Yeah.
When the trial reopened once again, no translator had been provided, and so Van der Burg was unofficially permitted to speak in Frisian, though Wolters informed him that officially I cannot understand you. So while it was a victory in the sense that Van der Burg was allowed to keep speaking Frisian, none of his testimony was recorded because it was in the wrong language. Watching from the wings was HxCReact, who took up his pen in Jernveen.
Yeah, no. No, I would have been pissed too.
Veenster Courier once again. Writing in Dutch, the language of the magazine, he compared Wolters to the mercenary outfit called the Zwarte Heep, or the Zwarte Hoop, who had terrorized Friesland in the late 15th century. He wrote, Hoop, who had terrorized Friesland in the late 15th century.
Wow, that's harsh.
Century.
Good on him.
De beantwoording van de vraag waarom de heer Wolters zo mateloos
I didn't know he was going to read it too. I seen the
de
blink.
taal van het volk waarvoor hij zo lang recht sprak, ligt meer op de psychiaters weg dan op de onze. Maar het feit dat hij deze geïrriteerdheid in de openbare uitoefening van zijn functie zo slecht weet te verbergen, is een feit dat ons allen raakt. Morgen kunnen ook wij voor de rechtsstoel staan. Dit kinderachtige, beledigende en treiterende optreden tegenover een representatieve figuur als de heer Van der Burg is een openlijke provocatie voor het Friese volk in het algemeen en voor zijn georganiseerde studerende jeugd in het bijzonder. De heer Wolters, die officieel geen kind meer is, moet zich deze dingen wel bewust zijn. In de middeleeuwen is Friesland geplaagd door een Saksische bende die de Zwarte Hoop werd genoemd. Meneer Wolters schijnt het erop gezet te hebben deze naam voor zich en zijn gelijkzinnige collega's te reserveren. A few weeks later, his fiery condemnation was joined by one written by the journalist Sjerbe de Jong in the Boalse Nieuwsblad, a Frisian language newspaper. Dit is wel een triest stukje treiterij. Wat in een gorg hier kan samen bewegen om sadom, provocerend en maniacaal op te treden. Kan zulks dit onder normale situaties rekenen worden, of is het woord onder psychiater? Als mens zulks meemaakt, moet men je beheerschen om samen net mijn kneppel op zijn baasje te aan. Seeing this as a provocation, now it was the turn of the two journalists, Schure and Sjeppe de Jonge, to be called before a court. Except this time it would not happen in Dierenveen, it would happen right there in the Palace of Justice in Ljouwert. So it was on the 16th of November 1951 that the accused pair arrived. The state backed Wolters, whom they felt had been illegally insulted for doing his job, while the defendants heavily protested the disparaging remarks he had made on the Frisian language and the fact that speakers of the language had been prosecuted for the simple fact that they had spoken or written in Frisian, in their mother tongue. As his final words in the case, Schure called upon God to aid him in his struggle. Ik mag het recht hebben, nou en in de toekomst, om als mijn volk in zijn ere en zijn bestaan taast wordt, vol van mij te slaan met het wapen dat mij net om een nog daar betrouwd is, het woord. Maar ik daarvoor straft worden nevens een norm die het net mijn volk, maar wel zijn onranners beschermt, dan zal het dragen van die straf mij gretere ere wijzen als hokkeprijs. Dan ben ik solidair met mijn vertochte Sjeppe de Jonge en met alle strijders van Friesland van eerder en later tijd. Xavier helpen mij, God Almachtig. The judge replied that this was unrelated to the case, and Schure and de Jonge were sentenced to prison sentence of 2 weeks. But ultimately, it is not what happened inside the Palace of Justice that is why the 16th of November 1951 is so remembered by Frisians. It's what happened outside. On the square called HxCReact, supporters of Schure and de Jonge had gathered, mostly fellow writers and journalists, students and other members of the Friese Beweging, the movement for Frisian emancipation. Initially, they had wanted to be inside the courthouse, but had been denied entry due to a lack of space. The gathering was held in a room that was only fit to house some 20 people. As well as this largely scholarly crowd, the fact it was being held on a Friday meant all the Frisian-speaking farmers from the local area were in Ljouwert for the cattle market. Having heard of the abuse suffered by Wiebe van der Hoek, Jane de Leeuw and Sjerk Francis van der Burg at the hands of Wolters, they joined the angry penmen on HxCReact. Fearing unrest, the police dispersed the crowd and there was a small scuffle before things calmed down again. It was at 4:30 that things really kicked off. Appearing from inside the courthouse, the writer Eeltje Boorters Volkesma addressed the crowd to share how Schure's case was going. The police thought that this was the sign that the crowd was about to turn violent, and they called for reinforcements from the constabulary and from the fire station. Fire trucks with water cannons arrived at the scene, further ratcheting up the tension as the crowd thought they were being trapped. Feeling threatened, the crowd on HxCReact hurled fruit from the market stalls at the police and pulled out their knives to cut through the firemen's hoses. Something snapped in the policemen outside the courthouse. A red mist descending, they charged the crowd, beating any and all present with their batons, even if they were uninvolved in the fruit throwing or hose slicing and happened to be simply passing by.
Oh no, you would have had a war, boy.
Men and children were beaten senseless in some cases, whilst the firemen's water cannons were used to blast the crowd indiscriminately. Luckily, no lives were lost, though the action would live in infamy as Kneppelfreed, Batten Friday, a term that Schure is said to have coined himself after he had heard what had happened outside of the courthouse on the 16th of November. While the battle on HxCReact was almost over as soon as it had begun, a political bomb had just gone off in the heart of Friesland. Newspapers throughout the province condemned police and justice alike. On Sunday the 18th, 2 days after the events of Kneppelfreed, ministers were already preaching about what had happened in the strongest terms. The Riot van de Friese Beweging organized a protest meeting a week later, which had to be hosted.
But yeah, it would definitely have not been the end of it. I could tell you that much.
Due to the large number of people who wanted to attend, and
got me heated over here. I'm angry.
People were unable to attend due to the mass demand to take part in these protests. How hostile the Frisian protesters had become is remembered in an anecdote told by Schure in his biography. Having spotted a farmer he knew from the Lege aan, he asked, "Kom Sanstra," zei ik in Schots in hem. "Jo je rek?" "Ja, mja," zei Sanstra, "en ik ga het blaffeke mijn om." En hij helle een grauwe browning uit de boeze. Zulks komt maar 1 keer oer, maar geen 2 keer. The Dutch press was also active, but warned against the possible radicalization of the Frisian nationalist movement. perhaps not an altogether unthinkable scenario given Farmer Sandstra's reaction. Several high functionaries of the police in Ljouwert had their windows destroyed, including that of the Commissioner of Police, Onno Houwing. Kneppelfreed was mentioned in the Dutch parliament, with several Frisian and non-Frisian politicians condemning the actions of the police. A wave of panic spread through Den Haag at the idea of a Frisian separatist movement sweeping the north. This may sound absurd today, but 2 years earlier the Dutch East Indies had also fought and won their independence in an armed struggle. Could it be possible that the next part of the Netherlands to go would be much closer to home? Realizing the severity of the situation, the Dutch government wisely opted for compromise. It prompted a massive overhaul in the law with regard to the Frisian language, laws which were finally pushed through in 1955 and 1956. Frisian became the second official language of the Netherlands. Frisians were granted the right to speak Frisian in court in Friesland and to be allowed to swear testimony in Frisian in any Dutch court. Frisian was also now promoted to a full part of the curriculum in Frisian schools.
Hey.
A national party for Frisians, the FNP, or Friese Nationale Partij, was founded in 1962. For them, Kneppelfreed and its anniversary remains a very important date.
Joet, 22 juli wit Kneppelfreed. Een wichtige dag in de Friese geschiedenis. En het is nog steeds wichtig. Wie zullen er verzwaren dat de Friese taal op elkaar staan blijft?
These changes form the core of the civil rights enjoyed by Frisian speakers today, and they came off the back of several individuals who were unashamed of their mother tongue despite being told by the law, the courts and the police that they should be. While some give Kneppelfreed an almost mystical significance, others barely take note of it at all. In my view, Frisians and speakers of minority languages should stop and take note, as well as taking heart, that through largely peaceful protest and resilience, the situation of the Frisian language changed fundamentally for the better. It's also worth noting the reaction of the Dutch government in granting these civil liberties, something that no doubt only happened because of the events of Kneppelfreed making the national press. Given what happened in Northern Ireland a decade later, this ultimately seems to have been a wise decision to de-escalate the situation, even if the two scenarios have some very important differences. Kneppelfreed lives on, especially for more nationalistic Frisians, but also in books, songs and popular culture. So today, I'll remember all those Frisians who were mocked, bullied and beaten for the crime of using their mother tongue. And I will be thankful that individuals like Wiebe van der Hoek, Jane de Leeuw, Sjerk Francis van den Burg, Thierry de Jong and Ferre Schurer made it possible for Frisian to enjoy the legal status it does today. Their struggle is far from over. Just recently, Jan Benedictus was barred from practicing his legal right of swearing the oath in Frisian at the court in Zwolle, as the judge was unaware that this was legal. More worryingly, in 2020, it became clear that there was a shortage of Frisian translators to be used to translate court cases so that people might speak Frisian in the judiciary. Outside of the law, many Frisians still feel ashamed of their language despite its rich history and now accepted official status. On the very streets where in 1951 Frisians protested against discrimination, you can still find stickers proclaiming Ljouwert to be an anti-Frisian city, which is ironic given that it's the capital of Friesland. Centuries of discrimination and belittling of Frisian and her speakers won't disappear overnight, or indeed over more than half a century after Kneppelfreed. But hopefully the past can inspire the future, and we might all be a little bit prouder of our mother tongues, whatever they might be.
Hey, I can't imagine it. That's crazy that it was ever even like that from the get-go. All over, essentially all over the court, not being able to find a translator in time. But all of these people that still stood by their mother tongue, that still speak it today. Like, I think it's freaking amazing. I think this is, I don't know. I'm not from there, but I'm proud in the way that it went down the way that it did. Even though it was horrible what happened to everybody that was standing around, it was changed for the better. Like, I don't know. I'm all emotional and confused over here. I'm learning something every day, and I appreciate it. Get Over Show History with Hilbert, all the love in the world. If you have more to add or more information that you'd like me to know, drop it down inside the comment section. Smash the like button if you liked it. The dislike button, but it won't believe you. Tell the next one of my Combustible. You guys be happy, healthy, safe. I love you to the moon and back. Peace.